Journal of Hi patrons.
Hey, patrons.
The Journal of Social Validity.
Mm-hmm.
I dig that. Examples of external and internal validity and the relevance of I guess clinical utility in
Yeah.
judging the quality of something.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some studies on like effect size and behavior analysis, and I've seen more journals lately that have included social validity measures inside of their stuff. Like I was reading an issue of BAP from last year, and a bunch of the articles had some like discussion around social validity, like how they
Mm,
collected social validity on like. So I was like, that's cool. Like that's a good start. But
yeah.
I think it should be a requirement. I don't think it should be like if you're gonna do it, like at least include some social validity measure as part of your like evaluation of your study.
Yeah, I think the exception would be when it's article
A rat.
reviews. Uh what is a rat? Yeah, you can even do it with a rat, I think. You just do some
I
of
think
the
you
ascent
could.
stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but when you're just doing like a meta-analysis, you're just reviewing a bunch of articles when you're um,
Sure.
sort of like Tim, I think it was Hackenberg, did like a big description of like the research on token economies and like a call for more research and like areas of research to do on token economies and stuff like that. Um, like those ones, I think obviously wouldn't need it, but yeah, I think when you're working with other humans, having some
Hmm.
kind of social validity measure, it's one of the reasons. Like I've always been so impressed with the Hanley crew, where they always did these concurrent chain procedures at the end, where they give the individuals an opportunity to choose their intervention or not. Um,
Hmm.
and I was like, that's beautiful. Like that's just such a wonderful way of including your participants in the work that you're doing.
I love it. Yeah. I love um I love the stuff that crew is doing. I got to see D2 Rajaramon talk recently,
Mm,
and he's great.
yeah,
He's a
they
lot of
turn out
fun.
some
And
crazy competent people there.
oh yeah, 100%. Now Hanley's working for Action Behavior Centers.
Yeah. Yeah, it went private.
Ooh, sell out.
Unrelated people, but we're actually talking about bad arguments today.
Yeah, yeah. I guess calling Hanley a sellout is a bad argument. That's not even really an argument.
I work in the private sector too. I'm a sellout. Although
I mean,
it
I
doesn't,
also work in the private sector.
yeah, doesn't pay as well as you might think, given the private sector.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
My
It's a
wife
very different
makes like,
space.
yeah, my wife makes like almost twice as much as I do working at the university.
That's fair. That's fair. My wife doesn't work any earn like work and make anything, but that's okay because she is the whole sole reason why this house stays afloat. So
Fair enough.
yeah, she has the hardest job I've ever seen.
Being Donald Trump's friend.
Being Donald Trump's friend. Yeah, she has to talk to him all the time and has to dodge his waving hands.
Small as they may be.
Small as they may be, she is dipping, diving, ducking,
Dodging.
dodging.
Or you intentionally doing the dodgeball thing.
Yes, I was.
Okay. Dip, dive, duck, and dodge.
There's another
That's
one, but I can't. Dip,
yeah.
dive, duck. Oh, now I got to know what that is. That's an itch that I got to scratch.
I'm looking it up right now. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
Yeah, dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. That's what it is. Yeah.
I haven't seen the
Uh-huh.
movie in a minute. I'm gonna need to watch that again.
Yeah, that movie is absurd.
I think Jason Bateman plays like an announcer.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yes.
like a very stupid announcer.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he yes he does. And then the cat Alan Tudyk is the pirate,
The pirate. Oh,
Steve the
I
pirate in
love
it.
Alan Tudyk. Yeah.
So it's funny
Um,
going back and watching him do that, and you're like, oh, right. He was like, could you imagine having that on your CV? Like, what are your acting roles? Well, I voice a chicken in Moana who has no
yeah.
speaking lines. I voice a giant robot in Star Wars that's very sarcastic and really great.
Yeah.
I'm also Steve the pirate in the dodgeball game.
Yes. I really want to watch the like My Resident Alien or whatever that show is that he's on.
Hmm.
Because I love Alan Tudyk. He's so fun.
He's great in literally everything he's in.
He's such a good actor. I think he is very underappreciated for his talent.
Yes, 100%. I completely agree with you. All right, you ready to talk about fucking anglerfish and light bulbs?
I am ready to talk about anglerfish and light bulbs. Oh,
In this episode, what does the deep sea, Thomas Edison, and textbooks have in common?
there you go.
Oh man.
And sticky lizard feet.
And hurricanes.
Oh, and hurricanes. There you go. You're very good at this. Your
I just
relational network
try
is very good.
I don't know why. I think I practice a lot of like having to like talking about bands. You talk about like a single member. It's like
Six
seven,
degrees of
six
Kevin
degrees
Bacon.
of Kevin Bacon, but
Yeah.
like worse because then you're going because you're going, this guy was in this band, but this band doesn't sound like this band. This band sounds like this band. And this band put out this record, which had members of this band. I've learned to do that. So I've learned to relate unrelated things
Wow.
in really weird ways. Like
I'm
it's a
impressed.
really strange and fun experience. So there's something wrong
Um,
with my brain.
no, I think you'd be really good at deductive games or deduction games.
I think that's the only reason I'm smart is because I do that.
I would argue it's because you got a lot of education.
That's a great argument. I don't know that I used it though. Like I tell people all the time, like I made a bet with myself to see if I could complete my PhD without opening a textbook, and I did.
Yeah.
And and
Oh my
and
God.
and I got a 4.0 in my PhD program.
Wow.
So that's what I'm saying. I didn't use it. I didn't use it at all. I was not a reasonably like I was I'm educated but not wise, I think. I can just put stuff together and make, I think fairly accurate assumptions based on some bits and pieces of information.
You know what I really struggled with a lot in school was I often really had a hard time understanding what the teacher was asking me to do. Um, I'd be like, I would answer to the best of my ability, and then be like, that's not really what I was looking for. And be like, then what were you looking for? And if that's what you're looking for, why couldn't you just say that so that I could do it correctly? I'm like, why is part of this assignment me reading your mind? They're like, well,
Right.
the other
Yeah, that
people
is
got it.
an unrealistic assumption or fair like that's an unfair ask.
Yeah, well, and then like other people get it. I'm like, I don't know, like they're fucking good at guessing the things that you do already. But I'm like, I'm just not. Can you just be more clear, please?
Yeah, I'm just asking for clarity. That's all.
Yeah. Is that so unreasonable?
For some people, it is.
Some people it is. All right, well, let's do this thing.
Let's do
We have a
this.
lot to
I'm
do. We
ready.
have a lot to do today, so
Yes, we do.
all right. Um, ready? I'll count you down.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, three, two, one, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your unconvincing host, Abraham.
And I'm your master debater host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the things that people do and animals do, and sometimes we talk about the poor arguments that people do about the things that animals do. And that's what we're doing today.
Yeah, I am so excited to unpack this because I have heard So I because I feel like as a scientist, and you've probably had this experience, so many people come to you trying to make an argument, and they are so grossly incompetent about the task at hand or like the topic they're trying to bring to you. But they have convinced themselves into a corner, and it's
Oh
just
yeah, they're
amazing.
they're so sure of themselves and it's like so nonsensical.
Yeah.
That yeah, then that's basically what we'll be unpacking today. And if you're joining us for the first time, and I'm pretty sure there's at least one of you that is, welcome and thank you for being here.
Hmm.
If you enjoy this discussion and you would like to support us in one way or another, then you can do so by leaving us a rating and review, picking up some merch from our merch store, liking and subscribing, and of course you can join us at our club team home base, which is Patreon, where you'll get some extra content, and I'll talk more about the ways that you can support us at the end of this discussion. But before we get into that, I would like to just acknowledge that it is November 20th, and so happy African Industrialization Day.
Yeah, it's also beautiful day, which is nice.
Sure is, yeah. In the middle of November, probably in Australia, it's quite nice. Well,
I would imagine so.
has has anybody ever said that though? Just kidding. We love you,
Maybe
Australia.
someone has.
It is also Future Teachers of America Day. Good luck, everybody. The
Yeah,
future
yeah.
ones.
Yeah, I was part of the FFEA, the Florida Future Educators of America, when I was in elementary school, and here I am.
Yeah,
Really not happy with current state of education. And where it's going next. Today is also globally organized Hug a Runner Day, or for short, Go Hard.
indeed.
Hmm.
Indeed. It is Name Your PC Day. So if you haven't already, I guess today's the day to name your
Sure,
PC something.
sure. It's also National Absurdity Day, so name your PC something absurd, like Frank Grimes.
PC, by the way, we're not talking about politically correct. We're talking about a personal computer.
Yes, that's true.
And a lot of people use that name synonymously with Windows. Um, I'm not sure exactly why, because technically a personal computer can be anything that's your computer. But
Right, right.
moving on, it's National Peanut Butter Fudge Day. Yes, please.
Yes, into it. Today is also Transgender Day of Remembrance. Super important day.
Very much so, particularly given the future for trans people that we're currently
Hmm.
looking at. It is
Yes.
Universal Children's Day.
And it's also American Education Week, which is only 4 days because we don't know what a week is.
Oh dear. It is International Fraud Awareness Week. Well, that's good. I wish we'd had that week maybe a few weeks ago.
Yeah, yeah. It's International Restorative Justice Week as well. Love that.
Sure. It's National Geography Awareness Week. So, in case you didn't know, there's such a thing as geography.
Yeah, and people live places. It's World Antimicrobial Awareness Week as well.
Mm, very good. Very good. All right. Well, we do like
Yes.
to mention those things. Some of you may celebrate publicly, some of you celebrate in private, some of you don't celebrate at all. And that's okay. We're not really a podcast about dates, it's just a fun thing that we do. But we are here to talk about something that is kind of near and dear to my heart, really, which is two things: evolution and arguing. Some of my absolute favorite topics. And
Yeah.
just to sort of set the stage here, there are some arguments that are so bad that even if they were right, they would be wrong. Like that's how bad they
Yes.
are. And there's a
Yes.
couple of ways this might show up that we can think of. One is that even if their main thesis was accurate, which it might not be, but even if their main premise was accurate, the argument that they make for it is so bad that it essentially makes their position incorrect.
Right.
Another way that this might show up is that even if their points were valid, like they're making relatively sound arguments, their premise is so flawed that their position is incorrect. This is actually shows up in arguments and like logical fallacies as an unstated major premise. unstated premise or unstated assumption. And we talked about this a little bit in our episode on critical thinking. And it turns out there are just a million examples of either one of these things. For today, we're going to take on the first argument, where we have a central thesis which is wrong. But even if it was right, the arguments for it are so poor that it makes it wrong, even if it was correct to begin with. But it is also wrong, and that's what
Yes.
we're going to unpack in this discussion.
Yes. So today we are going to understand and ask the questions of what does the deep sea, Thomas Edison, textbooks, and hurricanes, what do they have in common?
Yes, that is essentially the weave we are going to try to do. But I also, I also want to. Well, actually, let's go ahead and jump into it. Like, I think we'll set the stage as we start to unpack this argument. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me.
Okay. So we've talked before in previous episodes about learning styles. And if you haven't heard those, it was a really good episode, I think. I would recommend checking it out. Or if you haven't heard that, I think we only did one episode on that. But even if you don't, I'll give you a quick summary. This flawed and incorrect idea is that there is a way that people learn things, and they should only be primarily taught in that way, auditorily or visually or whatever. Now, there aren't such things as learning styles, but even if there were such a thing, which there isn't, the idea that we should only cater to a student's strengths is a bad argument. Because in general, we're trying to target education and remediation toward their weaknesses. What are the things that they struggle with? So
Right.
emphasizing their strength means failing to address their weaknesses. Um,
Right.
so
It's not comprehensive.
yeah, I mean, it just fails at its job to do that thing. So that's just kind of an example of what we're talking about here.
Right. And so there is a difference between lying, misleading, or obfuscating and actually making an argument. So, for example, saying that crime is up in the United States due to illegal immigrants is just factually incorrect at every single level. Crime is down. The crime that is happening is not primarily perpetrated by illegal immigrants. In fact, US born citizens are significantly more likely to commit crimes than immigrants. But the immigrant scare tactic is just a lie, not an argument. And it's a lie in
Right.
bad faith.
It is, yeah. Like they don't even believe the lie that they're selling. They just sell it
Right.
because they can. So anyway, we recently came across this interesting book that seemed like structurally it appears to be a textbook of some sort. And it's arguing against evolution, and it probably had a very specific audience, and we were not that audience. But
Sure.
they tried to use psychology to make their points. So because of that, I was particularly personally offended and felt that it warranted us dismantling their arguments. But
Yes.
interestingly, they had several, like it's a whole book, but the one that I zeroed in on was about the anglerfish. So let's do a little background on anglerfish.
Yeah. So if you all are familiar with anglerfish, they are that really ugly deep sea creature that's got the light bulb on its head that and we'll talk about this, right? So
A
you've
Thomas
seen some
Edison connection
depiction that's there we
and
go.
the deep
Deep
sea,
sea.
actually.
There we go. From a textbook. Haha. All right, so you've likely encountered some depiction of anglerfish because they are very unique looking and they're an iconic looking fish that has been used in many movies and imagery in a variety of ways. But we'll describe it to you so that you are clear about what we are talking about because a lot of the way it looks is some of the arguments that this textbook makes against evolution.
Yes. So anglerfish are very deep sea predators, or you could maybe think of them as hunters, but they're predators, okay? There are over 200 species of anglerfish that can live in shallow tropical waters to depths of over a mile. So they span a wide range of the different sort of levels of the ocean, but they can go as deep as a mile. And when you're down that deep, it is basically pitch black. So
Right.
little light, if any, reaches this depth that is like the light's basically undetectable once you get that far down. Furthermore, when we're talking about the pressure of the water, it gets pretty intense pretty quickly. Any of you who have done any diving will know this very well. the atmospheric pressure increases 1 atmosphere every 10 meters below the surface, which means that at a depth of a mile, the pressure is 480 atmospheres or 480 times more pressure than at the surface. And
Ugh.
for some back of the envelope calculating, this would be like being pressed, like if you were just suddenly appeared at a mile below the surface of the water, it would be like you were being pushed on all sides of your body by 7,008 pounds.
Oof.
If you were not in a pressurized suit in this environment, your body would be crushed pretty much instantly. You would just be poof, gone like that fast.
Right.
You would be very dead very quickly.
Yeah, you would be nothing but mist under the sea.
Yes.
So, but these creatures evolved in this kind of pressure, so they tolerated just fine. And that being said, the carnivorous nature of the biosphere at this depth and scarcity of creatures that can survive it means that food can be difficult to come by.
Anyway, anglerfish are iconic because they look very unique. They have this giant mouth full of long, slender, needle-like teeth that seem to make up their mouth seems to make up like most of their body. Like it just is so big. But
Right.
that's not even the part that most people focus on. Anglerfish have an appendage that grows out of the top of their head, either as like a straight pole in some species, or more like a sort of curved, almost fishing rod shape in fishing rod shape in other species. And at the end of that pole or rod, whatever this appendage is that's growing essentially out of their forehead, they have bioluminescent bacteria that glow. And again, it's pitch dark down here. So any kind of light really stands out.
Right. And there are all sorts of predation strategies: scavenging, territorial predation, catch and kill, trap, poison, and ambush. The illuminated bulb that they grow means that they can attract other fish who might be looking to eat some other bioluminescent creatures of the depths. This is called ambush predation. Essentially, they wait until prey is near and then they pounce. It's fairly common in the animal kingdom. It happens a lot. A lot of lures and a lot of like, hey, come here, come check this out. And then they go ahead and, you just got ate. Oh, sorry about you. Now you're food. That's what they do.
It's one of so camouflage can work in a multitude of ways, and one of them is for ambush predation. Sometimes it's defensive, like camouflage means that they hide from predators, but sometimes it means that they lie unsuspecting to attack. Snakes use some camouflage for ambush predation, but many insects will use camouflage for detecting or for avoiding predators. So there's anyway, ambush predation is a thing that definitely occurs. That's probably enough background on the anglerfish for this argument. So we'll go ahead and dive into the meat of the actual text to start dismantling this argument or dismantling their arguments after we dismantle the flow of this podcast with an ad.
Nice. I was gonna say, surprise ads like an ambush. So that's good too.
Oh, that would have been a good one. I'm sorry, I messed it up.
That's all right. No, you're good. You're good.
Why don't you bring us back in with the first paragraph there?
All right. Beep. All right. So we are back and let's start talking about this nonsensical argument that this book is making. So the first paragraph, this is where we're gonna start. First, they do some basic description of the anglerfish. Then they get into the meat of their argument and they state, quote, the question is, how could this luminescent lore and the behavior pattern coupled with it develop gradually? The theory of evolution states that the anglerfish must have evolved from normal fish, i.e., from one that lacked any strange headdress and, like ordinary fish, got its daily meal by chasing smaller fish. But just how did this evolution occur? End quote.
Yes. Okay. So that by itself has a lot of content that we need to unpack. So let's start with
Yes.
uh let's just go ahead and dig in. We'll hold off on the first question that they ask, which is how could this develop gradually? We'll come back around to that, but we'll address the other parts of the argument. So one of the things they say here is, quote, the theory of evolution states that the anglerfish must have evolved from normal fish, end quote. Quick counterpoint, no, it fucking doesn't. Evolution does not state that they must have evolved from normal fish at all, anywhere. Evolution states that a creature's biology adjusts to the prevailing circumstances of its environment through generations of natural selection and mutations. That's what evolution says.
Yes, and I think it's also important to note that generations refer to generations of the species and specific to that species, not generations of humans and time as humans relate to it. So
Yes.
multiple generations of a species may occur more rapidly because their lifespans are shorter and their reproductive cycles are much more frequent than humans. So
Yeah,
I think that's an important caveat as we start talking about
absolutely.
generations of this too.
Very,
Um,
very good point.
so the second thing is, what is a normal fish? There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of species of fish. And which one are they claiming is the quote normal fish? It's not like there is one archetype of fish and some rogue mutants spawned off of that fish to go start their own cool fish club, although I would like to join a fish club. Fish have evolved in several different evolutionary clades with several different survival strategies and food accrual strategies. So there are so many. I mean, if you just talk about the difference between a flounder and a barracuda, the differences are astounding.
Yeah. The variety is pretty incredible. So what happened is they evolved from some multicellular cellular organism, and eventually that became some carnivorous organism of some sort. And the most well suited to their environments, those most well suited to their environments, carried their genetic information onto subsequent generations in subsequent environments. So that's essentially like how the evolution there would work.
Right. So key point number one, there is no subtype or there's no archetype of a fish in every
Yeah.
evolution or every species from has come from that singular fish. It's not how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll actually just go through the first thing again. They state the theory of evolution states that the anglerfish must have evolved from normal fish. No, it didn't, and there's no such thing as normal fish. Let's go on.
Yes. So they say about ordinary fish that they get their daily meal by chasing smaller fish. That is kind of the standard fare. Now, again, ordinary means nothing in a sea of wildly variable genotypes and survival strategies.
Yes, but also again, they get their meals a lot of different ways. Scavenging, hunting, pack hunting. Um, like for example, like there are pack hunting fish. There is this fish called a blue goat fish. And because they are pack hunters, they can actually take down fish larger than they are because they can attack their prey as a large group. They essentially overwhelm them with numbers. And so, even though there might be a fish that's much larger than an individual blue goat fish, the pack of blue goat fish can take down a very large piece of prey, and then they eat that. And so they don't actually chase smaller fish, which is the argument that they were making. And again, it's a different strategy. This pack hunting strategy is a specific type of strategy that they developed.
Right. And so and also as part of this too, there are a lot of ambush predator fish. There are and some of the best names for fish that you're gonna see. Um there's the stonefish, there's the warty eye stargazer, there's the devil scorpion fish, which sounds scary. There's the brown rockfish, the southern flounder, and the wobblegong shark.
Those are very good names.
So good. Perhaps anglerfish evolved from similar fish as those ambush predators, or perhaps ambush predation just evolved naturally several times among several different lineages as a means to successfully obtain food.
Yes. Okay. And even beyond that, I found this 2020 paper in the Journal of Experimental Marine Biology and Ecology by Peterson et al. Is a D in there. And what they were looking at is the predation of these sculpin. There's a type of fish called a sculpin, and the predation of sculpin on Atlantic cod. And there are sort of species of sculpin that do what they call cruise hunting, and species of sculpin that are ambush predators. And they actually found that the ambush predators were much more successful at obtaining prey than those cruise predators. So perhaps ambush, and I was just trying to look for like ambush predation and the relative like success of that, and it seems like ambush predation does have some really specific advantages that makes it a likely strategy that is going to evolve multiple times if it means that they have a easier time procuring food.
Right. And so, relatedly, anglerfish are very slow swimmers. So, they would have a really difficult time surviving on a strategy of cruising for food and chasing down prey. And if you are willing to counter that with, yeah, but they could have evolved to be poorer swimmers because they didn't need to be fast with their ambush predation, then you're correct. And that means you just admitted that they evolved.
Exactly. All right. Um, Now, they also state that they evolved from this quote unquote normal fish that lacked any strange headdress. Now, we've already talked about normal fish is not a thing, but let's dig into this. Um, I kind of get from this, I think that they think that evolution happens pretty quickly, meaning that like across like three generations, you go from having not having a headdress to having one, and it just kind of like shows up that way. And this
Right.
is just not how it works. First of all, it almost certainly evolved from a species that would be considered a separate species that did have a headdress, because that's how evolution works in iterative steps. So, like at some point, there was a species that preceded the current version of it that did have some version of this bioluminescent headdress thing, right? And this kind of starts to get to the author's first question: how could this luminescent lure and the behavior pattern coupled with it develop gradually?
Right. So perhaps many previous ancestors had a bioluminescent headdress, but lost it over time as it was not always necessary. Maybe the evolution of a headdress started when some ancestor of the anglerfish had a small patch of dim bioluminescent bacteria and was better at catching prey and was able to more successfully survive and breed. So as a result of that, passed down that genetic trait of having a spot on its head that could lure prey, right? And as time went on, the bioluminescent patch became a protuberance, which is a good word. Or perhaps they always had weird spiny things poking out of their head, and at some point they started to bioluminesce, and that helped them obtain prey. Or perhaps they had lots of bioluminescent spines, but having fewer gave them a better advantage. It could have been a combination of any of those things, depending on what worked, what didn't work, what was selected in, what was selected out over multiple generations, not three generations. Like three generations would be the example of like, you yourself do not have a tail, but your grandchildren do. Like, that's
Yes,
how
yeah.
rapidly that would have to happen. That doesn't make any sense.
That would be alarmingly quick. So
Yes.
anyway, yeah, like there are a lot of different paths by which something like this could have evolved. And again, like if ambush predation, and matter of fact, it cruising predation and ambush predation and pack hunting, like versions of that can exist on a spectrum. Like it's not even like it's definitely one thing or another. You could have a
Right.
predator who is sometimes opportunistically ambushing its prey and sometimes is actually hunting and cruising for prey. And so it's like it's possible that it started that way. Like there's a lot of different ways that the strategy for hunting and the strategy for using its physiology to capture its prey developed side by side with one another because of the different advantages that it granted. And if
Right.
like it was a let's say it was a cruise predator and it also had some bioluminescence which tended to attract prey in the first place, and then it would go for them. It might have evolved to essentially be more and more of an ambush predator over time because it was less energy expenditure to just wait for your prey to come. And so the bioluminescence became more prominent and more focused as the ambush strategy became more focused and directed at just ambush. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right. So again, let's just go through the whole statement and make sure that we've unpacked it thoroughly. How could
Right.
the luminescent lure and behavior pattern coupled with it develop gradually? A lot of different ways, an infinite number of ways. The theory of evolution states that anglerfish must have evolved from normal fish. No, it doesn't. One that lacked any strange headdress, not necessarily. Like ordinary fish, that's not a thing. Got its meal by chasing after smaller fish. No, just no. Like there's a lot of different ways to obtain
Nope.
prey. It could, and
Yeah.
like ambush is one of them. Just how did this evolution occur? Again, a million different ways. So that's that paragraph that we've now tackled. But there's so many more. So let's move on to paragraph two.
Yeah, they're already off to a strong start, aren't they? So paragraph two, the next part of their argument states that quote, new species evolve from established species slowly, step by step, over many, many generations. End quote. First, we have already established, but it is worth reiterating, that there is no such thing as an established species from which another spontaneously branches off into some immediately different species. You're not going to have a tree frog all of a sudden give birth to toads. That's not how that works. Sometimes they remain relatively stable for a long time. Sometimes they change fairly rapidly or undergo many variations across several generations.
Yes. So it happens a lot of different ways. But major events can also force rapid evolution. And this is I'm going to now describe an example to you that we're going to come back to multiple times because it's just such a prime way of like debunking some of the pieces of the argument here. So during a recent hurricane in the Caribbean islands of Turks and Caicos, this was not 2024. This was like 6 or more years ago. But there was this hurricane in the Caribbean, in Turks and Caicos, and there are a bunch of lizards that live on these islands. And lizards mostly are okay during hurricanes, but this was a particularly rough hurricane. And during that hurricane, some lizards happen to have larger toe pads and stickier feet. And when the hurricane was blowing, and these like they tend to live on trees, and they're also really bad at weather forecasting, these lizards. So like
Uh-huh.
they didn't really plan for
Surprise.
evacuation in the hurricane. It just all of a sudden wind was blowing them, and they're like on these trees. And so the ones that had these larger, stickier toe pads were able to retain their grip on branches and leaves, but the lizards that were similar, as a matter of fact, the same species really, they just had slightly less sticky feet and slightly smaller toe pads. They were blown to their deaths. They were blown out to sea. They were just blown so far that they were smashed against something via
Yeah.
gravity or wind, etc. And so it basically left only the species that had the larger, stickier toe pads left. And the results were documented in a 2018 study. The authors commented that, quote, this is a striking case of rapid evolution, which, as we can see here, can proceed exceedingly fast, even within a generation, end quote. Because essentially what was left on this island were just the lizards with larger, stickier toe pads. And that just simple mutation meant that they were now the only and dominant version of that species of lizard on the island. Now, there's going to be plenty of other species as well. But for the ones that were like similar to those lizards, but just didn't have that mutation, that adaptation, they were gone. And the ones that are left that are going to have babies are very likely to have that same mutation moving forward because that's pretty much what's left in the gene pool.
Right. Right. So you may have even seen scientific experiments about this in which a lizard is clinging to something while being blown by a powerful fan. And anyway, lizards with the genetic trait of particularly sticky feet were now mostly the only ones to survive and therefore reproduce with larger, stickier toe pads. So this is essentially saying every member of the species that was reproducing at this time had this genetic trait. So as a result, when they reproduced, they passed down this genetic trait, and this genetic trait was useful for their environment. So going forward, when a hurricane comes through, they will be able to hold on to trees better as an entire species because that useful trait as a result of being in their environment is something that helped them survive over time.
Perfect. So, yeah, usually evolution is a slow step by step process, but it just is whatever you're adapted to in the prevailing circumstances that you're in. And circumstances can force very rapid change, even within a single generation. Like, let's just pretend, for example, hostile aliens landed on Earth. And for whatever reason, people with a very dark complexion were like nearly impossible for them to see. And so they wiped out everybody with light skin complexions. And the only ones that were left were people who had darker skin complexions. And then the aliens, did whatever they came here to do, get the resources, and then left. And then essentially what is left to breed would be people with a darker skin complexion, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
that would be an event that then selected for that's essentially what's left. Like those particular genetic traits will be the ones that pass on because the other genetic traits were functionally wiped out, right? Um,
Right.
I don't know where I was going to go. I wanted to do an ad segue. I forgot what I was going to do.
Let me, yeah. Well, I'll think one too, if we can. Man, because that was such a good point to end
Yeah,
that point on, the piece on.
let's actually say that. Boop. And that's such a good point that we're going to end on that point and play an ad.
Beautiful.
All right, we're back after congratulating ourselves on our own
Good
argument.
job, us.
Yay, we did it. Let's continue.
Yes. So this book continues. They say, quote, if a new trait gives the organism some advantage over its peers, it will more likely survive and reproduce. End quote. Now, here's the thing. This doesn't really, with these traits, don't really need to give the organism an advantage over their peers. It just needs to be the most advantageous trait for its given environment for that particular species. Like they may not even be competing with peers directly. If a trait makes it more likely that they'll be able to secure food and survive and reproduce, then that trait will likely be the one that leads to greater continuation of that species, which means more of that trait. So basically, that trait exists. It works for them. They reproduce, and then their children and their children's children and their children's children's children have that same trait that will help the species perpetuate.
Yeah, they're not necessarily like they don't have to be competing with their peers. It's just what they need. I'm also really not even sure what they mean by peers. Like, do they mean other anglerfish? Or fish that prey on the same species as anglerfish? I'll go ahead and just say that like I'm going to dismiss the first one charitably and assume that they don't mean other anglerfish, and mostly because most species are not directly competing with themselves most of the time. Even the sort of lone wolf species will still need each other at least for reproduction. So even if they aren't very social, they tend to not directly compete with one another. Some species do. It's not like completely absent. Definitely a human thing. But for the most part, most species are like kind of if they're lone wolves, they kind of just stay out of each other's way, but they like will still meet to reproduce. But otherwise, uh, they often work very socially, where they like support each other. Um,
Right.
yeah,
So as for the latter, ambush predators tend to be pretty beep, pretty optimistic. I was going to say. As for the latter, ambush predators tend to be pretty opportunistic. So there isn't like a species that they prey on exclusively that would make them in direct competition with other predators. Even so, with a limited food supply, they already are in direct competition with other predators. But as we've said, ambush predators may have a survival advantage because when you think about it, a lot of ambush predators are expending the least response effort to get the most reward they can in that situation. Like they're hiding
yeah,
and they're waiting for an opportunity, and it's going to produce some kind of some type of sustenance for them. Um,
right.
and further, the competition with other predators doesn't mean that they don't get any food or that they get all of it, just as long as they get their piece of the available food in that specific ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, if if they had essentially they outcompeted all other predators and there was like an abundance of food, there would just be a billion anglerfish, right?
Right.
Um, and if there was insufficient food because they were in competition, like they were in such direct competition with their other predators, then there wouldn't be any anglerfish. So like they're essentially fitting into the niche that's available to them, surviving on what they can. And yeah, some of them probably do starve to death. That is a thing that happens. But yeah, I mean, it's just like that's just to say they don't have to be out competing with their peers. They just have to be successful in their circumstance. So that argument
Right.
also is just wrong.
Right. Exactly. Oh man. And could you imagine like a million anglerfish like living in the same space? They couldn't trick each other. They'd be like, I know what that is. Oh, you.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Fun fact about anglerfish, I forgot to mention in our description of them, but all anglerfish that we see are female.
Yeah, because so I learned, and this is kind of a morbid fact that goes along with that. A lot
Yeah.
of species of anglerfish, the males will attach themselves to the female and then like attach themselves and die and get incorporated into the female's like body. And the
Yeah.
female, whenever they want to release fertilized eggs, will just take sperm from the attached appendage that is the former male anglerfish and just use that whenever they want. And sometimes they'll have two or three males attached to them and just be like, "I'll just use this guy today. Gary's gonna participate."
Yeah, exactly right. It's some of the most extreme sexual dimorphism in the animal kingdom because I think that the male fish maybe are even born without a mouth. Like they basically are like heat-seeking sperm missiles. And once they
Yeah,
when they're born, their like only goal is to find a female, and then as you said, they just attach themselves and like get basically absorbed into the female, and
yeah.
then as you said, like they're just like they take the sperm when they need them or want them.
Maybe that's why we haven't voted for a female president yet. We're so afraid of women.
Afraid that they're anglerfish.
Afraid that that we're just gonna turn into heat seeking sperm missiles, as you said.
Maybe. All right, let's get into. Oh, I guess we'll go through the paragraph one more time. So they say, oh, where do we even start this?
I can start it.
Oh, okay.
All
Sorry,
right.
I found it. All
Okay,
right.
good.
So, beep. So just to recap, the central argument they say here is new species evolve from established species. There's no such thing as established species, so no. And really, they don't like a new species doesn't like evolve from a species. They just kind of evolve, and eventually they would be separate from what would have been considered a separate species. Step by step over many, many generations. It can be that way. It's not really stepwise. It just happens as it happens. Sometimes those are more significant. Sometimes they're smaller, but they can be really rapid, as with the example of the lizards. And then they say if a new trait gives the organism some advantage over its peers, they don't have to have an advantage over their peers. They just need to be successful in their context. And like, I don't even know what they mean by peers. It will be more likely to survive and reproduce. And yeah, that part's, I guess, more or less accurate.
Right, right. So
Uh,
let's go into the next argument because their next argument, I think, is one of the most ridiculous ones. So they boldly claim that, quote, no one has ever observed any mutation, which, by the way, you should be skeptical if anybody says no one has ever observed any of this thing. Well,
yeah.
that's such an absolute that it's probably unlikely true. But this is what they said, quote, no one has ever observed any mutation that caused a new organ to appear or enhance the functions of an existing one. Abraham, take it away.
Okay. Yep. So that's the quote. Actually, yes. Setting aside the fact that oh, beep. Actually, yes, we have observed that. And setting aside the fact that that happened for every living species currently, as they all have evolved and developed new organs from the single cell organisms that they started as, we were actually able to observe this specifically in the rove beetle. And this beetle evolved a new gland, which was functionally a new organ that allowed it to spray toxic chemicals at enemies, particularly predators. It's a very small beetle, smaller than an ant, and it essentially curls up its rear, sort of like a almost like a scorpion. It looks like, and it sprays this toxic chemical from this gland organ that it evolved. And researchers were actually able to map the exact evolutionary development of that organ, and because of that, they could even use that to help understand organ development more broadly across evolution. So yes, we have observed that.
Yes. And also important, we have observed that and been able to observe that since we've started having an understanding of evolution because insects have very short lifespans. And so we can see multiple generations rapidly develop, which is really
Yes.
cool. I want to go back to that piece multiple generations over time. Like it would be a slow process for us as humans to develop an organ where we spray toxins out of our ass. But at the very least, they can do this. And they do this really rapidly because there are so many generations.
Yes, very much so.
Now, and another thing, as they're playing fast and loose with the term organ, we can too. And point again to the toe pads of the lizards in the Turks and Caicos example. And they now have an enhanced, quote unquote, functionality of their toe pads. Also, enhanced is not really an accurate way of describing it. It's just different. Whether or not that means improved or enhanced implies that it was trending in a better direction. In a way, it is, but only because it has survival benefits. But there are plenty of traits that evolve that are actually counterproductive to that organism, and that doesn't give them an advantage. Such as like sickle cells. Sickle cell is an evolution that has happened in humans that is not at all useful for survival.
Well, and it is in the sense that sickle cell, if I'm remembering exactly how this developed, sickle cells do not facilitate malaria virus. And so
Right.
essentially what happened was that there was, even though this is a painful, rough disease, evolution selected it because people with sickle cells would not die of malaria. And so they were able to go on and have more kids, and then they, because they were not a suspect to malaria, so then it became really prominent as a trait among people from that lineage of people who essentially evolved in a place where malaria was rampant, and that allowed them to survive malaria. So it's like it's an advantage in a way, but like it's also sucks, like
Right. Right.
very painful, very difficult, but it did help them survive in that context. And so yeah, like, and another one is, you can imagine it is like, let's pretend for those stickier toe pads that like right now that's helpful in the context of surviving hurricanes. But what if it made them slower at getting away from predators? Then in that case it might actually be a disadvantage for them. And so then the ones, like, let's just say there are no more hurricanes somehow, and or at least not in that area, and there's a lot of predation that's happening. And again, I'm not saying it actually makes them slower. I don't know. But let's just pretend it does. So they have a more difficult time getting away from predators. For the few that then have the less sticky toe pads that are smaller, they then actually might be selected for back to that trait if the ones with the stickier toe pads are being more easily preyed upon by other predator species. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Now, oh wait, no,
again,
oh,
there's
sorry, I
not
did that
like,
last point.
oh,
Sorry. Sorry.
oh, no, no, you're good. Uh, so anyway, I was just gonna elaborate real quick on that. So, boop. So all that is to say, like, a particularly evolutionary trait isn't good or whatever. Like, it just is what allowed this to benefit in this given circumstance. Like, it might even have some
Right.
significant drawbacks, and it might. Like, I don't know how often it's the case, but like there are probably going to be instances where a particular trait has some drawbacks. Like, we as a species have a really big advantage in that we have like these really big complex brains, and we have opposable thumbs. And in a
Right.
way, we walk upright has some advantages too. But we also are susceptible to cancer. Our language has allowed us to disseminate misinformation and lies more rapidly and more efficiently than like truth. We are very bad at seeing like one another as members of the same species, and so we can be very very violent toward one another. So like we have plenty of disadvantages that came with our big brains and opposable thumbs. Like, our opposable thumbs also allowed us to wield significant weapons of damage toward one another. So
Sure.
like advantages and disadvantages, it's just those also did help us survive and proliferate.
Right. Absolutely. So they go on and they say, quote, in fact, mutations often prove fatal. At best, a mutation turns out to be neutral, i.e., it doesn't cause the organism any trouble during its life, but also doesn't help it. End quote. Oof.
Okay, before we do that, let's take an ad break.
Nice.
Beep. I just needed to step away from that for a second. Like, their arguments get worse as they go on. Okay,
Yeah.
ignoring their non-parenthetical use of IE multiple times and the lack of necessary commas grammatically, let's go ahead and unpack this. Very first thing they say, mutations often prove fatal. Oh my God. I don't know what they're talking about here. They don't cite any examples or give any examples. Mutations happen constantly, even during a lifetime. There was a study that found that mice might undergo as many as 800 mutations in a lifetime, and shorter lifespan species do tend to have these. So I just don't even know what they're talking about. Mutations often prove fatal. What mutations often prove fatal? What are you talking about? They don't even give
Right.
an example of mutations that prove fatal.
Right, exactly. And to the argument that most of them are neutral at best, there's an example in human beings where a genetic mutation among a group of people has been actually quite helpful for them. So another example of this is found in the Baju or Bajau people. They are Southeast Asian indigenous peoples.
Okay.
There is actually some genetic evidence that this group of they've been labeled romantically as sea nomads. These sea nomads have
Pirates is what I'm hearing.
yeah, pirates. Yeah, they're pirates. They're diving pirates. So they have evolved to have slower heart rates and larger spleens by up to 50% that aid in diving to depths
Ooh,
to be able to like do some fishing and like spearfishing and hunting for food and stuff like that. So
like
they were
shellfish.
observed to be able to like shellfish and stuff like that. So they were observed to be able to dive down to 7 meters or about 230 feet without diving
Whoa.
belts, without weights, without equipment. And scientists have noted unique genetic markers among these seafaring indigenous folks that show that there's a direct evolutionary path of these folks. These mutations have occurred across generations where they were able to see that these organs have developed and allows them to process and make their use of oxygen more efficient so they can dive longer, dive deeper, and be able to maintain a source of food for them.
Uh, just for fun, I decided to look up 280 feet as it relates to building. The largest wood building in the world is in Norway is 280 feet. Um, not that
That's
that
wild.
not that that gives a lot of context, but yeah.
Yeah. I get nervous diving in a 10-foot pool. So I couldn't imagine diving 280 feet.
That's pretty amazing. Honestly, that is really impressive that they
So
can do that, and it makes a
to
lot of
that
sense
point,
given their lifestyle.
yeah. And to that point, I would like to ask the authors, how is that neutral? You fucking
Right.
idiots.
So even if you only consider major mutation, so we talked about like there are these small mutations that might take place, but let's just pretend like you're only even considering major mutations that structurally alter the morphology of a creature. It seems like a stretch to say that they often prove fatal. Often fatal? Like, so they're presuming that if a mutation happens, it just kills the creature outright? I'm gonna need at least an example, if not a very robust example, to consider that there might be many fatalities due to mutations, right?
Right.
Like there are so many small mutations that occur. Like there's the color of the stripe on a tail, an extra eyelash, a 0.01% increase in skin thickness, or whatever. It doesn't matter. But often seems like a gross overestimation. Even if they did often prove fatal, often doesn't mean always, which concedes that sometimes, I mean, they're making the case that when it's not fatal, it's just neutral. But I think that if you're saying often, that means that sometimes it's not fatal. And I would definitely argue that sometimes it is beneficial, as we've already talked about.
Right. So at best, a mutation turns out to be neutral. That's a direct quote from them. And at best, I don't think that that's even, I feel like they don't understand words. I think
Right?
at best, a mutation turns out to have a substantial advantage. Do we have to remind you about toe pads on lizards? We don't have to agree that mutations are all good or all bad, but to simply say that you can't say that the best case scenario is that there is no advantage or no net benefit from having some change to your genetics that will allow you that can maybe aid you in surviving.
Yeah. I think they don't understand what the word best means.
I think they also don't understand what a mutation is. I think that they're probably arguing maybe birth defects, and they're probably maybe looking
Probably.
at high rates of birth defects and like maybe mutations among reptiles. That happens a lot with like some reptiles, but like those mutations are pretty significant, and they're usually because of some inefficient splitting of cells during the embryonic phases and all that. It's not because they just decided that, like, oh yeah, this snake wasn't going, I think I want kids with two heads. And then the two-headed snakes are born and they go, didn't work. Like, that's not how mutations work.
Right. Yeah.
Ugh.
So again, I'll just recap this part of the paragraph where dismantling. No one has ever observed any mutation that caused a new organ to appear or enhance the functions of existing one. Yes, they have. Enhanced doesn't mean anything. All right. And then
Yes.
they go on to say, in fact, mutations often prove fatal. No, they
No.
don't. I don't even know what that means. And you don't give any examples. Like, I think that you're right. They probably are thinking of birth defects, but like, no, that's not, that's wrong. The opposite of correct. And doesn't, and I don't even know what they're talking about. At best, a mutation turns out to be neutral. No, at best, a mutation turns out to be advantageous. And that is to say, it doesn't cause an organism any trouble during its life, but also doesn't help it. I understand that that's what you mean, but you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so
All right.
frustrating.
Next paragraph.
Yeah. So, soldiering on, because you may be feeling the frustration that we are also feeling when we read these types of arguments. In an anti science world, we have to be the beacon of light and hope that brings science to the masses. So, in paragraph 4, they say, quote, the theory of gradual development fails to explain many existing features in organisms because these features are advantageous only in their present, finished form. The intermediate stages in a hypothetical development chain would have been useless or often harmful, end quote.
Oh my God. Okay. This is likely the last if you listener are with us on this and like also just sighing in frustration at the stupid things that they say, this will probably be the last argument we dismantled. There was a lot more in this, and I have it like I took pictures of this book so that I could refer to this. But it really doesn't improve. As a matter of fact, given the trend of deterioration you've already seen, I think I could safely make the case, and you would believe me, that their arguments just get worse, and
Yeah.
or at least do not get better. So,
Yes.
okay, so they said that very stupid thing. Let's just take let's just take the first piece of the sentence. All right. So what they said was, quote, in their present finished form. Stop there. There is no such thing as a finished form in evolution. You don't finish evolving. I, I mean, it's
Right.
just a fundamental misunderstanding of evolution. All of the species on Earth, all of them, I don't mean some of them, I mean all of them, they are currently and will always be in a state of evolving forms. All of them, always, throughout all of time. Just make
Right.
sure you're clear on that. Understanding this, saying that the features are only advantageous in their current form becomes obviously nonsensical because we're all in a transitional form right now and we always will be. There
Right.
are and those traits are always advantageous the whole time at every step along the evolutionary trajectory of that animal. Sometimes they're more advantageous and sometimes less. There are some creatures that their relative morphology has been so successful at maintaining their survival that their evolution has changed very little in a long period of time, like almost
Alligators.
imperceptibly. Alligators, certain sharks look very similar now to when they did millions of years ago. But that's not to say that they couldn't evolve. They just have had very little pressure to force them to evolve, to continue to change their morphology in a different way. But we are all constantly, always in a state of continued evolution throughout all of time. So there is no finished form here at all. So,
Right.
like the advantages that we see in those fish, the anglerfish, the lizards, us, any other creature, those are the advantages they have right now. and they might not be as advantageous in the future. They might evolve some other trait or organ or other aspect of their behavior that looks very different from it does now, and that will be advantageous in their future circumstance. But in the past circumstances, we had all of the evolutionary advantages that we needed at the time, and pressures
Yes.
moved those traits in a different direction as needed. They haven't really moved. There haven't been those kind of pressures on certain sharks, at least not very much. But some other creatures, they get those pressures constantly, and they evolve pretty quick. They've gone through many
Right.
iterations really fast. But like that, just like it just depends on the circumstance and the animal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that when we talk about evolution, the thing that's important to understand is that traits are advantageous until they're not. They are, and if
Right.
they're advantageous,
Exactly.
they will continue to get selected in. If they are not, they will eventually get selected out, but that takes time.
Yeah.
Case in point,
And probably.
appendix. Your
Yeah. Right.
appendix. Like we probably needed it at some point, but we don't need it now, and it's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's a great example.
we see it in our own bodies. It's wild to me.
Or like our wisdom
So
teeth that come in
our
all
wisdom
messed
teeth,
up all the time.
we don't
Yeah.
even use them all the time. We don't even
Our
need
tonsils.
who needs tonsils? All right, so consider the blue whale, which used to be a land mammal. They likely spent more and more time in the water, and as they did, the mutations that gave rise to the ability to spend long periods of time fully submerged in water would have been advantageous and increasingly so as they moved into water permanently. And you see, they have finger bones in their flippers.
Yeah. And they've got their sort of blowhole on the top of their head. So it's very likely that what happened is those that had a nose snout that was closer to the top of their head could spend more time in the water because they could have their nose just the top of their nose poking out. And the more that the mutations moved that further back along their head, the easier it was for them to remain fully submerged. And like the evolution that their heart rates beat very slowly so that they don't spend a whole lot of their blood or oxygen mean that they can spend more and more time underwater. They've got this great lung capacity. They're very good at regulating their metabolism. And all of those are things that they eventually developed because it was advantageous for them to do that more and more. They'll probably keep developing that. Like it might be that like it is more advantageous for them to stay submerged at larger depths for longer as we do whaling. And so, what very
Right,
well may happen is that whales will start to spend more and more time at lower depths because it's better for like the ones that do tend to survive more. Right, because
right,
we've hunted them so much, and there's an example of, and I think that they're not really clear on example exactly how this is working, but there are these elephants in, I want to say Africa, it could be India, that have been poached a lot. And what has happened is they've actually started to be born without tusks because they were being poached for their tusks. And I think what happened is that some elephants that didn't have tusks were not poached. And so they went on to have more babies. And so they're starting to see more and more elephants born without tusks because that trait was essentially selected out by poachers.
right. Exactly. We're watching it happen.
So all of this makes the second part of their sentence that they had. The intermediate stages in a hypothetical development chain would have been useless or even harmful, completely nonsensical. Like,
Right,
no, because the intermittent stages were helpful and successful at those time, but different pressures selected for different changes in their morphology. And so they would not have been harmful, and they definitely were advantageous.
right, exactly. So this goes back, and this is just one example of how arguments can be so wrong that it'd be wrong even if it were right. Right. Like the idea that, like, even inside of their arguments, not just the fact that what they're arguing is patently incorrect, but the fact that what they're arguing and the way they're arguing it is completely wrong. They're using misunderstanding of words. They're using a misunderstanding of the specific concept they're arguing against. They are using absolutes. They're doing all these things. These arguments are so bad that they make the central thesis at least seem incorrect, if not actually be incorrect. And as an example, if even if creationism was accurate, which it's not, These arguments do not support that hypothesis of creationism being the thing that's happened, and do such a fantastically poor job of it that you could reasonably walk away believing the hypothesis to be falsified.
Yes. And yeah, exactly right. And I do want to go ahead and go back to that last sentence of theirs and just make sure we do our sort of one at a time note.
Yeah.
They said the theory of gradual development fails to explain why many existing features in fails to explain many existing features in organisms. No, it doesn't. It does a great job of that. Because these features are advantageous only in their present finished form. That is a nonsensical statement. There is no finished form. They are always advantageous at every step. The intermediate stages in a hypothetical development chain would have been useless or often harmful. No and no. They would have been
Right.
advantageous,
Right.
and they were. And when they were harmful, they were selected out. Okay.
Right.
So, as you said, the like, even if creation, even if their essential tenet here that is that like evolution is wrong or that creation is right, their arguments are just they're so weak that like you walk away from it feeling like, well, that can't be right because you did such a bad
Right.
job. It's kind of ironic to me because I'm like, if you wanted to be persuasive and convince someone of your argument, you may as well at least use relatively logically sound arguments because then even if you're wrong, you've at least persuaded your audience. And it's like this is a book. You had all the time to like, and you didn't even have the like pressure of peer review to have someone like
Right.
go in and unpack this for you. You could have done this. So anyway, I think there's sort of an example, I think, of where I can sort of paint the picture of like how you could have essentially an argument that's right, but have the argument be so wrong that makes your overall argument wrong, which is
Right.
advertisements.
Oh, nice.
Beep. Just kidding. That wasn't my actual example. I have a real example.
Yeah, let's do that. So the argument that we would say, or the example we would use, is it would be like if we had tried to convince you that mushrooms are the best food by giving you tons of reasons that mushrooms are not the best food, or by trying to convince you that mushrooms are the best food by telling you a bunch of lies about mushrooms that are also logically incoherent.
Yeah. So let's pretend that I'm trying to convince you that mushrooms are the best food. Probably a lot of you are excited about that, and some of you are disgusted. But here's my
Right.
argument for why mushrooms are the best food. Mushrooms allow you to select the exact height that you'd like to be.
Oh, I like that.
Now, are you convinced?
You got me on the first point, but tell me more.
Nutritionists say that getting at least half of your calories from mushrooms will slow down or even halt aging.
Even better. So I get to pick how tall I am and I get to slow aging?
Yep. Mushrooms
I'm
contain
in.
every vitamin you'll ever need in the exact proportions that you need them.
Oh my God, that's even better. I love that. That's so definitive.
I feel like you could reasonably believe that not only do mushrooms not do those things because that's ridiculous, but you might even think that mushrooms are bad for you because I couldn't even come up with a real reason to support your choice of eating mushrooms.
Right.
Like I didn't even give you an actual reason and it's like if there was a reason, why wouldn't I have given you that instead of a bunch of nonsense that you know isn't right? And so that's what I mean here. It's sort of these bad arguments.
Yeah, I mean it's just and it's again, these are arguments with you'll find that these arguments have a particular bias and that is one thing to always look out for, but I think whenever you're arguing with somebody, it's important to determine whether or not they even have an understanding of the concept to begin with to argue against it. And I think sometimes that happens where you have got this situation where people want to be experts on something and they are grossly incompetent in that subject, this being one of those examples. They are grossly incompetent on the subject of natural selection and how it works and environmental factors that impact genetics and how species will evolve based on environmental pressures and how any of that they are grossly incompetent on every point that comes up in that space.
And I think the whole reason that I got really interested in this is because they were specifically trying to say the behaviors coupled with their morphology could not have co-evolved. And I'm like, Yes, they could have. And I mean, me
Right.
just saying that is already a better argument than any of the arguments that they made. Um, because
Right.
because I'm like, I'm not. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm like, yes, because the thing is, like, behavior is essentially an organism's interaction with its environmental circumstances. Like, I'd be willing to bet that you could train an angler fish. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to bet. I know with pretty high level of certainty that you could train an angler fish to do relatively complex behaviors that it would not have done if you hadn't trained it to do those things. Part and parcel as an example of this is that we train dogs to do a lot of things that dogs would not have otherwise done. I saw a
Right.
presentation recently where they were training wild wolves to receive anal swabs to check for worms. And wolves, if you don't know already, do not like being poked in the butt. So,
Nope.
like, it took a lot of training, but they got them there. And these are not domesticated animals, but like they got used to humans. The humans got very good at training the wolves, and the humans also got very good at like not pushing the wolves to a point where they were going to get themselves injured. And they got to the point where they would allow these very basic medical procedures to ensure the safety and health and well being of those animals. And the animals don't know that, but we shaped that behavior up. And it's because behavior just, it is shaped by and it occurs in the context of its environmental circumstances. And that can change wildly in the space of a single lifetime, let alone many, many generations of that creature, particularly when they're very fast. And they don't even have to be smart. We have trained cockroaches and they don't even have a central brain. Like
Right.
that's how effective this technology is. So like you're going to try and use psychology to prove that evolution doesn't work and I am going to take you down.
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are. We did a whole episode on it.
We did a whole episode. And there's so much more. As we were discussing this, we were sort of realizing like we could do many episodes on this topic and just take terrible arguments and dismantle them step by step.
Yeah. Yeah. As we are wont to do with any topic. We're like, oh yeah, here's one topic. No, just kidding. There's 10 episodes from it.
Yes. Now, I'm going to, because I think someone will have heard this and maybe be stuck on it. I'm going to push back on something that you said, Shane, a little bit earlier, which is,
Okay.
and the claim they said no one has ever observed, et cetera. And you sort of flagged that as a red flag. On one point, you're exactly right that like superlatives like that are often not particularly useful, but we can actually use them in instances where we're talking about things that are like well outside the realm of possibility. No one has
Sure.
ever observed an actual alien life form. No one has ever observed homeopathy to work.
Right.
No one has ever observed an actual Loch Ness monster. No one has ever observed a ghost. Like there are examples that you can point
Sure.
to of like pseudoscience things that I think uh and demonstrate the fact that like the lack of observation is some evidence against that thing happening.
Yeah.
But I also think when you're talking about no one has ever observed X and it is like a thing that someone could have definitely observed, then you have that superlative has definitely lost you that argument. And I think generally speaking, most times superlatives are not particularly helpful.
Right. Yeah. That's fair. That's reasonable.
Do we need to define superlative? We haven't done vocab in a while.
Do you want to do it when the episode is as long as it is right now?
No, you're right. We should cut it. All right. Boop. All right. Well, we went long, which is fun. At least I had fun. I hope you all had fun.
I had fun. I
Uh,
had fun.
Great. We are going to recommend some things, but first, many of you, if you have been listening regularly, you might have noticed that there's starting to be some ads showing up where we did not want them to be, and for some reason, the site that we use to distribute our podcast has been inserting these ads because it says that we don't have enough of them, and I don't know why. But to try and get around it inserting ads where they are unwelcomed in the middle of our conversation, I'm going to go ahead and provide the algorithm with one more ad break now. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about our recommendations.
That's wild. I didn't know that was going on.
Yeah, it started doing it a few weeks ago. It was super fucking annoying. It was like, and it wouldn't let me change it. It wouldn't let me move it. It wouldn't let me reduce it. It wouldn't even let me like increase the length of our other ads so that it would stop doing it. It was just like, nope, you need more ads. I'm like, what? Why? Fuck you.
Yeah,
So,
what's so weird.
yeah. Beep. Okay, well, let's pivot completely and start talking and share our recommendation. Oh, actually, hold on. Boop. Let's pivot completely and give some credits, and then after that, we're going to share our recommendations. So, as I said, thank you so much for listening, all of you. You are a major reason that we keep doing this podcast. We like talking to all of you, even though we don't get to talk to you directly. We enjoy that you show up. So, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yes, we
But
love you so much.
some people like what we do so much that they decide that they're going to help us in a really big way. One way that you can do that without helping us financially is you can leave us a rating and review, you can subscribe, and definitely go tell a friend. Word of mouth is an awesome way to spread news about podcasts that you like and that you want to support. But if you do want to support us financially, it really does help tremendously. We do need it. And you can do that by going to, well, you can pick up some merch from us. We sell mugs and beanies and sweaters or something like that, I think. But you can also go to our Patreon page and join the club, and there you'll get access to ad-free episodes, behind the scenes content kind of stuff, all that sort of thing. And maybe even the best part of that is that I will read your name because I am very just grateful for the support that you provide. So here is a list of people who have done that thing: Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. If you like hearing your name on podcast
Woo!
episodes, join over there and I will read your name too.
I love it. Thank you all so much. Our hearts are with you.
Yes, very much so. We also really we are a team of people, and so I must thank my team very much for the help that they provide. Writing and fact checking from Shane, Katie, and myself. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, and our audio engineer and producer is Justin Greenhouse, who is just so good at what he does that we could not do this without him. Thank you all so much.
Yes, absolutely. We are the best.
And of course, as I mentioned before, thank all of you listeners for being with us today. Let's recommend some things.
Yay!
You can start.
Okay, all right. Beep. So I'm going to recommend a book. I think it's related to this particular topic. Not arguments, but genetics and evolution, which is really fun. And that is a book
Oh,
called Upgrade by Blake Crouch.
hmm.
So if you are
You mentioned
familiar
him
with Blake
before.
Crouch's work, I have. I read Recursion by him, which is a really wild
Yes,
sci-fi story. So
I
he
remember you saying
does
that.
this really, yeah, and it was so good. So he does this really interesting thing with sci-fi where he makes it feel like hard sci-fi and not like fantastical kinds of weird things. So this book is
Love
about a
that.
guy. Yeah, it's so much fun. If you like Andy Weir, then you'll like this
I
type of storytelling
love
too.
Andy Weir.
Yeah. So Upgrade is about a US agent that is tasked with he works for an agency that is designed to take down illegal genetic modification labs because there was some major event that ended up killing 200 million people because of basically like a genetic alteration in rice, like a rice genome. And so they create an international agency that is designed to take down these illegal labs, and then he gets infected with a virus that, and this is like the first like 10 pages, so this is not a spoiler. He gets infected with a virus that alters his genome and creates all these mutations that effectively make him superhuman. Like his brain works faster, his bone density is greater, he's stronger, his conditioning is better, and it's this whole espionage spy thriller that has to do with that exact like experience of going through that and then finding the culprit who infected him. And it is
Wild.
so good. It is so good. I cannot put it down. So it is one of the best books I've read in a long time.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I think
All
you
right,
would
love
really
that.
dig it because it's easy to read and it's just a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds very in my wheelhouse. Yeah, I think I'll
Yeah.
add that to my list. Is
Yeah,
that part of like a
100%.
series, like a trilogy or something, or is it just its own thing?
That for that one it's its own thing.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm recommending a movie. I think you may have even recommended this, but I saw it recently and I was pretty blown away. This is a recent Disney movie called Inside Out 2. So this is the
Ah,
sequel to the
love it.
whatever year Inside Out came out. But Inside Out, like the basic premise of this, if you have seen none of them, is it is about the emotions in our minds, and they sort of have this control switchboard, and so you sort of see a change between when they're doing manipulating the switchboard and then the little girl's behavior. And Inside Out 2 is she's going through puberty, which comes with it many things, including new emotions that get entered into the
Right.
sort of control room setting, and a really funny gag where the emotions go to touch the switchboard and they like barely touch anything, and and she like freaks out and like her
Uh-huh.
emotions are
Uh-huh.
extreme. I think if you want to understand how behavior works, this movie is not it. That is absolutely not how like
Right, right, right.
it works. But the metaphors for like thinking about our emotions and our values and our personality are so beautiful. And the writing on this show is just on another level. It is so
Yes.
the writing was so incredible. The jokes were so good. The plot was fantastic. I mean, it was just so well constructed and well thought out and beautifully executed. So like it's not a like factual depiction of like how psychology works, but it was a beautiful metaphor for how psychology works, if that makes
Right,
sense.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I loved it. It's incredible. And it's just beautifully shot too. Like it's beautifully
Yes.
designed.
Yeah, yeah, the animation was incredible. The everything, like it was really really like well done. High caliber movie. So strong recommend from me and Shane.
Yes. Yep, stamp of approval.
All right. Well, that's what we have to say about movies and books, and what we have to say right now about these bad arguments. Although, as I said, it's very possible we will try and tackle these in the future. Thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything that you would like to add or that I forgot before we wrap up here?
No, I think that's it.
All right. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya. All right. That was so much
Excellent.
fun.
Yes, that one was fun. I felt like I had a really good time.
I mean, I think our myth busting episodes are always just a blast.
Right? Yes. Like we could be just a myth busting episode or a
Oh my
podcast.
God. That would be so much fun.
All right, I'm gonna tell Justin that we're uploading right now.
All right. Sounds good.
So next weekend is the weekend before Thanksgiving. Will you be available next weekend since that's the week of? Oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah,
Yeah, the week of.
I'm available. Yeah, I'm available. Like I don't have any other things that are going to get in the way for the rest of the year.
Okay, cool. All right, sweet. So, awesome. I'll just keep trucking away, getting as many of these recorded as we can, and start planning for the 400th, and start getting the website ready to launch CEUs and stuff.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it.
Cool. I wish stop recording for patrons. Bye, patrons.
Bye, patrons.